I'm John Travis in Novato, California on the 15th of April, normally tax day, but that's been extended this year. And I have the fortune of talking to Mimi Guarneri in La Jolla, right?
That's correct.
Close by. And I am reaching out to what I consider the second generation of the holistic doctors, us old farts who started back in the 70s. Fortunately, were reinforced by particularly having women. It was pretty much an old boys club, except for Gladys in the early days. And delighted to have you today to find out who you are and why and what led you into your path that you've taken up the mantle. And you're still the president of AIHM, or?
Right, I'm still president of AIHM, which grew out of ABIHM, which,
Yeah.
as you may know, my mentor Lee Lipsenthal was very active in.
Right.
And AHMA, of course, which was started by Gladys and Norm Shealy and so on. So we sort of all came back together a number of years ago to form one organization.
Yeah, yeah, and the ongoing battle of, was it only going to be doctors or include other helping professionals? And that finally got resolved. I did interviews with Norm and Bill Mann and Gladys already, so got that history. So let's start with where you were born and how you grew up and what kind of childhood influences led to your first becoming a doctor and then a weird doctor, like looking at the whole picture.
Yeah, so thank you for that opportunity. It also forces me to think about it, right? So I grew up in Brooklyn in a very Italian enclave where we still had traditional three-generation households. I grew up with my grandmother, aunts in the house. So we had a large extended Italian community. So very early on, I learned the importance of community and social connection. It was everything. And that was true for the neighborhood as well. My grandmother ran the neighborhood grocery store where I spent a lot of time with her. She was ultimately my first mentor. And she taught me a lot about food from when I was very, very tiny. She would say to me, because people would come in and they'd be out of money for the month, ran out of money, and would come in and say, I need to get some food. Can I put it on credit? And she would always say yes. But she would also teach me that when you didn't have a lot of resources, there were some better food choices than others. And she's really the one I learned about how cheap lentils are and how healthy they are, and how you could add lots of beans to your pasta to have the protein and so on. So I had that early experience of community, of service, and of traditional three-generation households growing up. I also was fortunate to have a grandmother that basically said, you can do whatever you want. You can be whoever you want. You can, and she herself was very, very smart, but not educated, college educated. And she ran her business and owned some real estate. And she always said to me, just go to school and don't worry about taking care of the house. You know, I didn't even make my bed when I was younger. That's how crazy it was. But that's sort of the environment I grew up in, and a fair amount of religiosity, but not strict religiosity, you know, church on Sunday, holy days, but all in a more positive spin than in a God-fearing kind of spin. Some of my friends had, right? So it was more joyous celebration. So I had that as my background, but on a you can call it karmic or a knowing level, I knew I would be a physician. It's almost like I came in programmed for that work, and I fought it for a long time.
Hmm.
Thought I'll be an anthropologist because I loved anthropology. I loved archaeology. But there was this deep knowing that I came in to do healing work. And so at the age of 17, I decided to volunteer on the local volunteer ambulance squad. And, that sort of started me to look at medicine really as service, right? And I had this family doctor who would come to our house, Dr. Malomo, and he'd come in his broken down car and he'd make house calls. And I remember for my family, it was the most important event of the week, right? The doctor is coming. And everyone loved him. And I thought, it's so wonderful to be loved like that, right? And I would get a shot in the butt, as we all did at the time, and probably penicillin, and who knows, and we were usually better the next day, whether it was real or placebo, I don't know. But that's sort of the environment I grew up in. And I had an uncle who was a family practice doctor who had the office right in his house. So, you can go from his office to his kitchen with just a few steps. And what was really fun about that is all the patients were really known by the family, right? It wasn't just, you weren't a disease ever. You were Mr. So-and-so, who was father of so-and-so and grandfather of so-and-so, and you ran the local hardware store. Everyone knew everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my surrounding, right? And then
Do you have
yeah,
siblings?
go ahead.
Did you have siblings?
Yeah, I have a younger brother and I have an older brother. And my older brother passed away tragically. He drowned when I was 10 years old,
Hmm.
which was a very traumatic event. And but my younger brother is doing quite well with family and kids, niece and nephew in New Jersey. And again, the extended family is there. I had a lot of early trauma with the death of my mom at 8 and the death of my brother at 10. Again, pointing to the importance of having this community around you to get you through this kind of trauma. There's no other better way of putting it, right? I really believe that if I didn't have this strong grandmother, strong aunts, they were all maternal figures, right? Because they ran the households, they made all the decisions. So I had all these strong women around me that really supported me.
Oh yeah, I came up with a 6-word summary of my work a few years ago. The currency of wellness is connection, and
Yeah.
Italian families are the epitome of connection
Mm-hmm.
in the West anyway, compared to the Northern Europeans that are so isolated. So,
Well, I just on that note, I wish you could have seen our group for Easter Sunday doing a Zoom call, every part of the country, and everyone shouting and talking over each other, and just like any good Italian meal, right? It says it all.
great, great.
Yeah.
So, how was school for you?
Um, that's an interesting question. I really liked school as I got older. School became like my place. Like I just loved it because you didn't have to do anything. You just got to go into the classroom and learn and absorb information. Like I loved medical school. Early on, I wasn't as happy with school. I just didn't like it. And I think, not that I didn't like it, I didn't have the support I needed for it. Let's put it that way, But after my mom died, my older cousins sort of took me on as their project. And they made sure I got all my homework done and my papers. They got me into a routine where I actually got to the point where I started to love school.
Mm.
But very early on, like kindergarten, it was a little bit of a struggle.
And your father during this, losing his wife, and
Yeah, very, very traumatic for my father. And then he died, I mean, we talk about this, right? When you lose a spouse, my father was traumatized over the loss of my mother.
Yeah.
But 2 years later, over the loss of my brother, his son,
Wow. Double.
tragically, that just set a course for my father where he died 7 years later, when I was 17 years old. I mean, he had had a heart attack. I mean, you and I know this. This is broken heart. This,
Yeah.
uh, and he just never quite came out of it. And of course, in those days, there weren't the resources we have today, right? There wasn't the people to go talk to, the understanding, I mean, of grief and grief counseling and the kinds of things that we take for granted today just weren't available. And so again, it was a lot of early trauma.
Mm. So then you went to college. Whereabouts?
Right. So how did I pick my college? I was living in Brooklyn, and Brooklyn was kind of interesting. We had Bensonhurst, where I grew up, which was all the Italians. And right next to us was Borough Park, which was all the Hasidim Jews, right? So we had this great enclave of Italian and Jewish community that I grew up in. So I picked the B train, which was the easiest train closest to my house. I said, where does this train go? And it went to NYU.
Uh-huh.
So I wish I could tell you something more exciting about my college choices, but with very little guidance, I ended up at NYU. And
Great school.
yeah, right. Everybody says great school. So I sort of ended up there. And again, I took a circuitous path because I was very interested in things other than just health and medicine. I was interested in literature, for example. I majored in English literature.
Hmm.
And that was my graduation major. And so a lot of my time was spent reading Shakespeare and reading Sylvia Plath and Edna St. Vincent Millay, and, the list goes on and on and on, while I was taking all those science classes on the side.
Good balance.
Yeah, but I wasn't really thinking about it in that way at the time. I was just doing what I liked. And I remember I got called in by the head of chemistry, a female professor, and she looked at everything and she said to me, you will never get into medical school. What is all this English literature and Shakespeare and all this stuff? And you're never going to get into medical school. And probably that was the best thing she could have done, because when she said that, I walked out of the room and I said, I'll show you. So sometimes those things propel us as opposed to hurt us.
Yeah.
So I finished college pretty quickly. I did college in 3.5 years, and I was done. I mean, there was nothing else left for me to take. And I thought at that time I wanted to do research. And I actually went to Polytechnic, and I took a lot of classes at Polytechnic, believe it or not, in biology as it relates to engineering. So it was really bioengineering that I was starting to study. And I thought, well, I'll spend time doing research. I was still fighting what I knew I was supposed to be doing, which unconsciously, which was going to medical school. And I remember going into a class, a research lab, and I walked in and they were doing research on dogs. And I thought, I'm out of here. I'm the biggest dog lover there is. I don't want any part of this. I thought that it was like, okay, I'll go to medical school and I'll work on humans. It was so traumatic for me to see that. And I finally decided I'm just going to apply to medical school. And I did. And I got into downstate, which was great because at the time it was $5,000 a year. Yes. state school, great school.
Where
And
is that in Manhattan?
it's in Brooklyn. It's in East New York,
Uh-huh.
in a very impoverished area of Brooklyn. And it has Kings County Hospital, which is a huge city hospital. And of course, so I ended up going to medical school there and got an incredible education, a great education. And you know how it is at the city hospitals, it's do one, see one, teach one. And I will tell you, as I went through that process, I knew nothing about holism. I was taught nothing about holism. I was taught nothing about global healing traditions. As a matter of fact, there was a young man in the class who was a friend, and he said to me, I'm going to go to Tibet because I want to learn Tibetan healing. And I thought, you're a nutcase. I mean, I had no framework for any of this. None, zero. You know, my whole framework was, you know, I'm going to learn everything I can about every disease I can. I'm going to, you know, I was in every class. I did very, very well in medical school, got all sorts of awards at graduation, but I was completely tunnel visioned in the conventional program, completely. And I was good at it. And then when I went to internship, I went to Cornell, New York Hospital. And I chose Cornell because I thought, you know, if I want to do internal medicine, and I knew by then I was going to do cardiology, that I would really like to be around people that were really talking about the literature and in internal medicine and really learning it from a head standpoint, whereas at the city hospital, I already had learned it from a hands-on standpoint. I mean, the training was incredible. And so I went to New York Hospital and spent a couple of years there at New York Hospital, Sloan Kettering, and Hospital for Special Surgery. And that place was a trip like none other. And again, it was all very conventional. No one crossed my path that opened me up to anything different. I really had no framework for anything that we would call holistic, or now we say integrative medicine, holistic medicine. I had no framework for it at the time.
And no one else probably did either. It was
Right.
at that point. Just for a reference, what year did you graduate from?
Right. So when Gladys and Norm were forming American Holistic Medical Association, I was finishing high school, and I graduated from medical school in 1988.
Uh-huh.
And I was doing my residency in New York Hospital until 91. And then I went on to do cardiology fellowship until 94. Again, all still straight, all still following the conventional protocol, conventional paradigm, to the point of when I came to Scripps in 1994, it really was to do interventional cardiology. Richard Schatz had developed the Palmer-Schatz stent. It was one of the first stents. And I was his fellow. I was a fellow to Schatz and Tierstein, learning interventional cardiology at the highest level. And it was there that I was, you know, putting in, and I kid you not, over 700 stents a year. I used to just go from room to room, putting in stents. And I opened the door one day, and in the doorway, just literally standing there, is Dean Ornish.
Ah.
I didn't know who he was. I had no framework for that. And he says, you Mimi Guarneri? I say, yeah. And I thought for sure he was somebody who wanted me to try a new catheter, a new stent. You know, we were doing all this research on stents and catheters and all this sorts of stuff. And he said, Paul Tierstein told me I should talk to you. And Paul was my mentor, probably the world's best interventional cardiologist. And he said, I want you to do a research study. I want you to take those people you can't stent. You know, you have to remember this was the 90s, and the people that, and the equipment was rudimentary at the time. And he said, I want you to take those people you can't stent or you can't bypass, and I want you to put them in this lifestyle change protocol. I want you to teach them yoga and meditation. And I was like, you're out of your mind. What are you talking about? Yoga and meditation. And so it became quite funny because I had zero framework, and eventually I agreed to do the research. I said, okay, I'll do the research. And I started to think about who's going to do this research, you know, and in medicine, we always have research nurses, like in interventional cardiology, I always had a research nurse with me who would do all the heavy lifting, you know, all the paperwork, sign the patients up, you know. And I thought, I'm going to get a research nurse that understands cardiology, but also understands this world of meditation and yoga and so on. So I started asking around, and everywhere I asked, everybody said Rani King. And I said, who is this person? And they said, she's an ICU nurse over at the other Scripps Hospital, but she's a TM meditator, and she's a healing touch practitioner. She knows all this stuff. And I thought, that's my gal.
Yeah.
So I convinced Rani to leave her ICU position, which actually she was happy to do this research. And because this was her paradigm, only she hadn't had the opportunity to really do it. And so we started to do this research where we took, and I mean it, we took the sickest heart patients. We took people that were told, quote unquote, go home and get your affairs in order. There's nothing else we can do. I remember we had one guy, we would walk him around the track, and we had to be behind him with a chair because every 15 feet he had to sit down. And we were teaching yoga, we were teaching meditation, of course, everything I knew nothing about. So I started to look at this, and I thought, maybe I'm going to become a patient. Maybe I'm going to do this program because I have to be here anyway with the patients. So I drew my blood, and I had a cholesterol of 320 with a strong family history of heart disease. And I thought, well, this is not good news. And I was caused AAA, stressed out, not eating right. You know, I hate to say it, typical doctor running around the hospital. Mm-hmm. And I decided I would start doing yoga with the patients. So I would go to yoga class 3 times a week with the patients. When they were exercising, I would be on the exercise bike because I had to monitor them. You know, we had them on telemetry. And all the patients, of course, went to support groups. And long story short, not only did it change my life, but I also started to see how it changed my patients' lives. I mean, we had a 91% reduction in chest pain, which was huge without drugs. 91% people were losing weight. Their A1Cs were coming down. Men were getting erections that hadn't had erections in 15 years. And I started looking at this and I said, what the heck is going on? And why wasn't I taught this in medical school?
Yeah.
Right? And so as we were approaching the end of the research, Rowney and I sort of looked at each other. We said, we can't just stop this program. We have to keep going. And so that keep going became the Scripps Center for Integrative Medicine. So we raised money and we created Scripps Center for Integrative Medicine. And everything we did in some sort of clandestine way. So, you know, we
had to in those days.
Right? Everything had to be like, we couldn't even say yoga. We had to say stress management. Mm-hmm. We couldn't say vegetarian diet. We had to say plant-based diet, right? Mm-hmm. When it was time for us to hire an acupuncturist, we found an RN who did acupuncture so we could bring her in as an RN, although her whole job was just to do acupuncture. You know, all these crazy things that we had to do to work our way around the system. And one of the funniest was I had a young doctor who's now well-known, Dr. Robert Benakdar. He came to me and he said, I'm finishing my residency and all I want to do is acupuncture. I don't want to do this medicine stuff. And I thought, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to pull this off? So I convinced the Department of Cardiology that Dr. Benakdar would be our first trainee fellow in integrative medicine. But because there was no such thing as a trainee in integrative medicine, we put him in the fellowship program for cardiology, if you can imagine that. So we slipped this family practice doc in. He didn't have to do any cardiology. His goal was to build the pain program. And for those of you who know him, he's a wonderful, he wrote the herbal book, and he's a wonderful acupuncturist. His specialty is pain and nutraceuticals. And I and Roundy have been doing the natural supplements course and evidence-based approach now for 17 years. So everything we did was done in some sort of, creative way. And through Dean Ornish, I met Lee Lipsenthal. And Lee was just a beacon of light for me, because he was the first physician that actually talked to me about holistic medicine, that actually talked to me about my own feelings and my own holism. And he convinced me to sit for the first ever exam for the American Board of Integrative Holistic Medicine. And if I remember correctly, I want to say it was the year 2000. So here I was going to take a board certifying exam in integrative holistic medicine. I really knew nothing other than what I learned through Ornish program and the work I did there. And I remember going to the hotel, I think it was the Adams Mark Hotel, for my first ever ABIHM meeting. And I sat in the audience, and I don't remember who was speaking, whether it was Lev or Rob. I don't remember who was speaking at the time. Probably Rob Ifka, if I have to guess, talking about the impact of dairy on sinusitis. And I sat back and I thought, what is he talking about? He's talking about food causing sinusitis, food causing arthritis, and I'll never forget, like, all these bells went off. And I realized, oh my God, I'm missing this huge piece to the puzzle that I was never taught any of this. And I'm listening to lecture after lecture on supplements, on acupuncture, on mind-body medicine. And it was just eye-opening for me. It was totally eye-opening. So I took the exam, and you know how we clinicians are. We're usually pretty good exam takers, even if we don't know what we're doing. And by a stroke of knowledge or luck, I passed the exam. I had actually learned a fair amount from Ornish and Lee Lipsenthal and so on. And I realized that what I was doing for intervention was great for the acute care setting. And it became very clear to me, if you're having a heart attack, a stroke, you get hit by a car, my God, you better be in the best medical place you can be in. But where Western medicine fails was in chronic disease, how we approach and treat chronic disease, and the prevention of disease. And for the first time, I started to understand that what I learned was so good in the acute side, the differential diagnosis, what drug to prescribe, should we go to the OR, right? And I was missing this whole other piece. And that helped me to conceptualize what went wrong here, right? It helped me to understand that. And during this process, they say that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. So Ornish was the first teacher. Lee Lipsenthal was working with Ornish. And then in the middle of all of this, I had an experience where I had two things happen to me. One, I had a frozen shoulder. I had an injury, I couldn't lift my arm. And it was not a problem, because to stent, you don't really have to move. It's just a few hand gestures. So I just kept working, stenting, doing my thing. completely ignoring the fact that I couldn't lift my arm above my head. And Rowney King, who was our nurse for the Honors Program, said, let me do some healing touch on you. And I thought, what the heck is this healing touch now? Now I something else I have to learn about. And she did a healing touch treatment on me. And it was in the context of my also having gotten disseminated herpes from a patient. So I have this experience, I have this frozen shoulder, I have this disseminated herpes. I'm completely flat out exhausted from this virus. She does this treatment, and I kid you not, I get out of bed and I say, I have my energy back. I feel totally different. What is this healing touch? And I thought, if this can help me so much, it can help my patients. So my shoulder was getting better. And then I thought, I'm going to do something else. I'm going to have an acupuncture treatment. And within 48 hours, after I went through a healing crisis, which was something I didn't know what that was either, my shoulder was fine. And I thought, what is this biofield therapies? So that really got me looking at all the global healing traditions. What is there out there that was left out of my medical school training? So that propelled me for the next how many years to not only train myself, but to also train clinicians to fill in the gaps that we didn't get in medical school. And that's been my work up to now is, so I went back and I became a healing touch practitioner. I did all the levels. I went back for Ayurvedic training. I did that through the Maharishi University group. Anything I could do to learn more so that I can not only bring it to my practice, but that I can understand, you know, I know I'm not going to be an acupuncturist tomorrow. I could if I went for training, but I wanted to know, when do I refer to acupuncture? What's the benefits and so on? And that's really been the journey for me. And, you know, in 2004, I think it was, I was asked to be on the ABIHM board. And it was really there that I got to meet clinicians that thought differently. It was there that I got introduced to Gladys McGarry, who's been a love and a mentor, to Molly Roberts. If you haven't interviewed Molly Roberts, you,
No, I don't know her.
oh my goodness, my God, you must interview Molly Roberts. Molly was the head of AHMA, and she has done more than just about anyone for this movement. And not only has she done it, she's done it with such grace and such giving of herself that when you hear her story, you'll realize where a lot of the pieces fit in. So I always say we stand on the shoulder of giants. You know, Gladys is, for me, Norm and Gladys, you know, there's the first wave of giants, Bob Anderson. Then there's colleagues that I learned from, Lev Linkna, Rob Ifker, Lee Lipsenthal, Molly Roberts, Wendy Werner. I mean, all these people that I was on the ABIHM board with. And then there's another generation now that we're training, right? And so that's a bit of how I got to where I am. And we didn't have formal training, as you know. You know, we learned from each other. We learned by trial and error. We learned by putting our skepticism over here and saying, okay, let me pay attention. Let me just not shut this out, but let me see, is there something here that makes sense? And that's been a piece of how I've been doing my life.
I want to take a little side trip here because you've mentioned healing touch, and Dee Krieger was on an airplane with me once. We just stumbled onto each other, and I was aware of it back, this was 70s, I think. And I learned she just recently died. I was hoping to interview her, but Did you have much contact with her directly, or what was that?
I didn't at all. I didn't have contact with Krieger. I'm sure Ronnie King, who founded all the healing touch work in 1993 at Scripps, that's the same nurse I've been talking
Right.
about,
Mhm.
who I had contact with, who was extraordinary, was the woman who founded Healing Touch with the American Holistic Nursing Association, which was Janet Menken.
Mhm.
Right, so Janet Menken, who's also passed, was the nurse that sort of put together the whole Healing Touch program, which used a lot of different tools, you know, some of Prue Joy's work and different healing techniques. And Healing Touch is what's recognized as a healthcare training program in biofield through American Holistic Nurses Association. So I had the privilege of being taught by Janet Menken, which was quite an amazing experience. I
Uh-huh.
also had the privilege of another icon, Valerie Hunt,
Oh,
right?
yes, I know the name, but I
Okay,
never.
so Valerie Hunt is an icon of, I mean, the most brilliant, if you can listen to any of her tapes, talking about consciousness, talking about healing, talking about the use of, you know, her work with the chakras. And just to me, I have been so privileged to have met her and sat in her kitchen and had her do a treatment on me at one point. And so there's so many people that we just can't forget in this movement. And Valerie Hunt is one, and one who's still alive is Rosalind Briere. So, you know, when I think about the people who have taught me about healing, right? It's been more for me personally, the Healing Touch community. So it's been the Janet Menkins, Ronnie King as the next generation. Then you have Rosalind Briere, you have Valerie Hunt, of course, Barbara Brennan and the Brennan School of Energy Healing. So this is where I really learned a lot about healing and a lot about consciousness and really how to think differently about health. And I also can say, because it's public knowledge, that I was the cardiologist taking care of Louise Hay,
Mm.
who for me again, another icon. I mean, you know, I remember in 2015, I had a bad pneumonia. I mean, very bad pneumonia. I had hemolytic anemia, I had blood transfusions, on antibiotics for 40 days. And I remember Louise coming in for so-called appointment with me, you know, sort of toward the tail end of this. And she sat there and she said to me, "What are you grieving?"
Mm.
And I thought, why? She said, lungs are grief. She said, you're grieving something. And I thought, what could I possibly be grieving? I'm not grieving anything. You know, that was my initial reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought about it. I thought, oh my God, here I was at Scripps from 1994 for almost 20 years, created Scripps Center for Integrative Medicine, raised millions of dollars for the center, was doing all this, what I thought was powerful work for patients. And for many reasons, and you know, we don't, that I don't even think are worth getting into, that were emotional for me at the time, I left. I made a decision to leave because I was no longer philosophically aligned with the healthcare institution and the decisions they were making. But today, I fully understand that healthcare is not about health, it's disease care. You go to the hospital when you have COVID-19, right?
Yeah.
And their resources are being used for that. I understand that now. I get that. And many of us have been trying to put this integrative medicine, this health and wellness concept into healthcare systems since the 90s when it's not their paradigm. But anyway, so I had left and I with divine guidance, and I mean divine guidance, I found a building in La Jolla where I can open my practice, but it needed to be renovated, and the renovation took 9 months. So here I left my practice, and I had no resources. I had no way to pay my mortgage. I had no way to pay my bills. And the analogy I used for myself is I thought, this is like being on a trapeze, right? So I'm hanging on one end of the trapeze, and I can sort of grab another end, and that's safe. But if I let go, the universe is going to help me. And all I can say is that's exactly what happened in so many ways. It's like I took the cup, I emptied it, and the universe filled it with all sorts of opportunities and things. Well, when Louise was sitting in my office talking about grief, and I realized, oh my God, I gave up all this stuff that I created, all my connection to it, all the effort I had put into it. It's no surprise I have grief.
Sure.
Right? And Deepak also, I remember he called me and he said, "You have pneumonia?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "What's that about?" I said, "Well, I have mycoplasma." He goes, "No, Mimi, what's that about?" Like, don't talk to me about mycoplasma. What is it about? And of course, it is from these giants that I learned so much more than I ever could dream that I could learn that I ever learned in medical school. And it's a beautiful compliment to what we learn in medical school, right? So,
Yeah.
when young doctors say to me, I want to do what you do, I say, okay, so first you've got to really learn medicine, and you can do this as well, and it's all connected. But it became such a beautiful path because instead of just having drugs in my toolbox, I have so much more. And not only do I have so much more for myself, but also for my patients.
Wow. What a story.
It's a story. We're still on the journey.
Yeah.
As we sit here today, we're still on the journey.
So you have your own clinic and staff. What size are you, and what's your patient population?
Yeah, I have a clinic in La Jolla, and of course, because I'm an integrative cardiologist, and so I have a lot of cardiac patients with a big focus on prevention and lifestyle. But what I'm happy to say is, and this was something that the hospital wasn't ready to do when I was there, is I brought on board a couple of naturopathic doctors because I really wanted clinicians that focus on health and prevention and really understand herbal medicine and botanical medicine, and in ways that even I don't think clinicians trained in integrative medicine understand. It's a different level of training, if I might. That's not across the board, but I wanted that expertise.
Mm-hmm.
And traditional Chinese medicine expertise. So now, as I sit here today, we just had our meeting this morning where we have a membership practice where people do pay a fee, but we do see people fee for service. We tried the first year to take insurance, and I have to tell you, it was a disaster. I mean, we spend 90 minutes with people, an hour with people. Unless you're doing group appointments, it's very hard to give that kind of time and take insurance. But we have, the beauty of it is, here we sit in the middle of this COVID-19 crisis, and we have really, I believe, put together unique protocols for prevention, for people, for treatment. I mean, we're treating a number of people in the community. And of course, we're taking a pure, strengthen the soil approach, if you might, support the immune system approach. So this has been an interesting journey.
You have an unusual name for your center. I'm forgetting what it is.
Well, it's called Pacific Pearl La Jolla.
Pearl. How did the pearl come up? That was, I'm curious.
Right. So when you think about how a pearl is made,
Mm, okay.
right? So an oyster gets a little irritation or a little sand, and it begins to secrete a healing salve, if you might, and eventually that roughness turns into a pearl. So it's sort of the analogy for all of us. We're all pearls in the making.
Gotcha.
And and actually it was Rowney King who picked the name. You know, it's kind of funny because she said when she was in meditation over 20 years ago, she saw a pink building called Pacific Pearl. And here it is now. So she was 20 years early, and she came up with the logo. But we picked the pearl because to make a pearl, there is some roughness and there is a little bit of suffering, but ultimately there's healing. And for many of the people that come through our doors, we call our patients pearls. For many of the people that comes to see us, there is suffering and there is pain. And our goal is to, all of us as clinicians, I see our role is to alleviate suffering in any possible way that we can.
So how many staff do you have?
Well, I don't usually count people, but I have 3 medical assistants. I have 2 receptionists. I have a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner who does all of our acupuncture, 2 naturopathic doctors, and I have a naturopathic resident right now, a holistic internist, and
What's a holistic internist?
excuse me?
A holistic internist? What's that?
Well, he practices internal medicine, but he's
The light.
yeah, he's definitely seen the light. And I have another cardiologist, so 2 cardiologists. And then I have Rowney King is here. She's our executive director, but she also does a lot of hypnosis for us and a lot of healing touch, deep healing for our patients, which is wonderful. So that's our eclectic little group.
And are you doing it virtually now with the shutdown, or how?
So what we've done is when we knew we were coming into we didn't know which way San Diego was going to go. And of course, when Governor Newsom, rightfully so, said, you know, we're shutting down everything that's non-essential. Of course, we're healthcare, so we're essential. So right at that point in March, we converted everything we could to telemedicine. Mm-hmm. And that has worked out well until now. Now we do see a fair number of people for intravenous IV infusions, particularly for immune support. So we do bring some people in, but of course everyone is pre-screened and everyone wears a face mask, and you know, everyone has their temp taken and all of that. So we take all the precautions that we can. We've had a number of patients with COVID-19 and family members of our patients. So we've had a couple that came off a ship in February and they were sick. And now we have the antibody testing. So we're participating in a research study. So now we can look back and see who has antibodies, who has IgM, who has IgG. You know, we're just all learning about this and this particular virus, but it's very interesting. Our internist was very, very sick in December, and he happened to be sick when he was on vacation with a friend who got him sick, and he was IgM positive. So obviously what he had in December, that tells me he had COVID-19 in December. We have a number of patients who have converted antibodies. They're all everywhere on the spectrum, from IgM to IgM, IgG, IgA. Now, of course, there are multiple coronaviruses. It could be a different coronavirus, but given the symptoms we're hearing, it's pretty consistent. Sounds like a flu. but is an influenza, has the cough and the fever component, the body ache component. And the thing that stands out to me the most is the profound fatigue. And the minute someone says they've lost taste and smell, you can almost guarantee that it's COVID-19.
Hadn't heard that aspect of it.
Yes, as a matter of fact, it looks like if people lose taste and smell, there's a 10 times higher chance that that's what the diagnosis is. So look, we're all learning. We are in a learning mode. And what we're doing is we're using lifestyle to support people's immune system. I mean, I'm encouraging all of my patients to not watch more than 10 minutes of news, to watch funny movies, to get out and walk in nature, to sit in the sun, to take a hot sauna if they have one available to them, drink plenty of fluids, get a good night's sleep, stay on a good anti-inflammatory diet, and then we are adding, and of course, do your mind-body practice, your TM twice a day, or your mindfulness, or whatever it is that resonates with you. And we're also adding in immune support nutraceuticals, which I believe are very evidence-based. And I smile, give a big smile when I see it come out the conventional literature that vitamin C has been helpful in a patient, or something that airs more on in the world that we live in. And the sad part for me is I think we as integrated practitioners have a lot to offer here. And we're offering it to our people in our centers and our communities. But I'm looking forward to us writing some papers to show what we've done, because I think we can help people in a much bigger way.
You mentioned IV infusions for this vitamin C for...
Yeah, we do IV vitamin C, we do lysine, B vitamins, and now if I have a Nutri-Eval on someone, I can tailor it to what they need. But for immune support, there's going to be vitamin C. And you could safely give up to 10 grams of vitamin C without knowing what glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase is. So you can give it, and there are lysine and other things that you can give in an immune support formula. So we have, that's been another area that I learned a lot about from our naturopathic doctors, because again, that's an area that we're not versed very much in Western medicine. Mm-hmm. And it's really very valuable. In Western medicine, the only time we think about giving vitamins, we think about it, is when someone comes in with alcohol tremors or DTs or Wernicke's, or something's going on related to alcohol. And we say, oh, let's give this person B vitamins. The only time we give magnesium is when somebody's having a malignant cardiac arrhythmia, Torsades de Pointes. So we need to really take what we know, and which is why I'm so interested in the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine, teach clinicians the pieces that they're missing. I mean, I love it. I have MDs here. My cardiologist, Dr. Kabak, she's the other cardiologist. She's mixing herbal tinctures. She's in there she's mixing tinctures for cough, and she's mixing tinctures, pure raw herbs, whether it's tussilago or it's echinacea or something else. She's mixing quercetin, whatever it is, rhodiola. She's mixing pure products for our patients. When you think about that, here's a cardiologist trained in integrated medicine who's now learned from our naturopathic doctors, hey, this is how we do this. And that's to me the beauty of the Academy, really working to do interprofessional training, mm-hmm. right? Doctors, I always thought, why do doctors and nurses get along so well? Because in the hospital, we work together, right? And, as a doctor, if a nurse came over to me and said, hey, do this, do that, I would do it. Well, we weren't trained with naturopathic doctors. We weren't trained with Chinese medicine. We weren't trained with Ayurvedic medicine. If we were, we'd have a different world right now.
Sad. So the Academy seems to be flourishing, and I'd like to focus a little bit on its evolution. And since you were there on the ground floor and still are the president, What what's your perspective on how it shaped up?
Well, it's interesting. I tend to be an idealist in some ways. So I came in as the president, the incoming president of the American Board of Integrative Holistic Medicine, just as at the time that the American Board of Integrative Medicine was making integrative medicine a specialty. So ABPS, American Board of Physicians, was making integrative medicine a recognized specialty. At ABIHM, we were doing certification of clinicians. So a decision was made, just as I was stepping in, by the board to give up our board certification, because now this was going to be taken over by a larger, more, maybe more respected, who knows, entity, right? And so we said, okay, so now what do we do? Since what we did as ABIHM was to do a board review course, and then people sat for our certifying exams. So we had our big annual conference, which was our board review, and then people sat for our exam. So now if we give away our exam, we really, what do we do? So it was really at that point that Molly Roberts and I started to talk, and we said, is it time that we bring AHMA and ABIHM back together again? Because we were one, but because we were doing a board exam, you had to keep the board and the exam separate from the educational component, right? And that started the whole dialogue. And then the question became, what are we going to call this thing? And is it just going to be physicians? And you know, nurses don't practice medicine, right? So anytime you put the word medicine on something, it really leaves out the 3+ million nurses that we have, plus it leaves out a host of other practitioners. And we said, well, if we really recognize that we believe in all the global healing traditions, then we need to be about health, right? And so we ended up with the name Academy Integrative Health and Medicine. And that health word came out of the roots of holism, but a lot of people didn't like that. I mean, and it was very hard for us to give up the word holistic, because everything we do is holistic. And that almost set up, I'm sorry to say, a little bit of battle lines, because there were people who felt strongly on either end. And it was sort of like being in this no-win situation. I remember Danny Friedland, who was just an extraordinary chair of our board. That poor guy must have gotten 50 gray hairs just trying to deal with this issue. And the question, so there was a naming issue, and then there was, so who can come into this tent? Are we just going to be MD centric, or are we going to try to open it up to be an umbrella of a philosophy, right, as opposed to a degree? And the challenge with that, of course, is right away people think, oh, they're trying to take our members, or, oh, they want, you know, they're going to be practicing our craft, right? And I've always said, I'm not a naturopathic doctor. I don't pretend to be. I'm not an acupuncturist. I don't pretend to be. But I want to work with these people, and I want to know when to refer to these people, and I want to learn from these people, right? So I'm not a DO, and I don't pretend to be. I don't do manipulation. But these have been some of the challenges, right? Is getting people to come together, because I always felt like there's a world out there that's huge, with huge lobbying and huge money and huge everything, from the pharmaceutical industry to the AMA to all these very well organized organizations. And here we are creating more silos and saying, okay, I'm a member of functional medicine, I'm a member of holistic medicine, I'm a member of natural med, when we're really sort of singing from the same songbook. So how do we solidify ourselves so we become stronger? And that was really the dream for the Academy. And we are very much working toward that still to this day. We have chapters now all over the country, which is terrific. We have excellent online learning, and we have a fellowship program, which is the only interprofessional fellowship program. I'm not going to say it's easy. It's hard. And you know, people say to me, what am I going to get if I join that organization? I join all sorts of things. Like I give money every month to UNICEF. Do I ask UNICEF what they're going to do for me? No, I give money every month to Amnesty International. I don't ask what Amnesty is going to do for me. I support what they believe in. And I want to support them to do the work. I give money to the food bank because I want them to do the work. I'm not asking them what they're doing for me. And so I was idealistic, thinking that if people really believed that this is the kind of medicine they want to practice, that this is the kind of world they want to see, that we would be able to, with numbers and with working together, tip the scales, right? Get it to a tipping point where we can't be ignored and marginalized anymore, right? And let physicians, because physicians have that quote unquote credibility, let physicians push the way through the door. I don't care who pushes that door open, but we all have to walk through it together. And it doesn't matter, it's if you believe that treating the whole person is important, body, mind, emotions, spirit. If you believe in the global healing traditions and you want to be educated and pull from that beautiful world of information and tools that you have that are way beyond what you learn in conventional medicine. And if you believe that it's a better world if we're all working together, then why aren't we working together? Why are we fighting for a silly piece of the pie? Whose conference someone's going to go to? Who has this? Who has that? When the other half of the world, which is just pumping drugs, right?
Yeah.
Is so much bigger than what we have to offer. And so that's the message I've been trying to deliver. And I've been trying to say to clinicians, we need you on board, and we need you on board in philosophy. Yes, if you can become a member to the Academy, please do it. It helps to support the work, just in the same way that my membership to Humane Society every month helps to support the work, right? So I'm optimistic. I have to say I'm optimistic. And the young ones are much more collaborative. And that's the good news.
Yeah. What is your membership at this point?
No, honestly, I don't know the number. I don't know the number. And that would be a Tabby Parker question, and how many people are on our mailing list and all of that. I can tell you our annual conference usually hosts 1,000 clinicians, and our fellowship program usually has 40 to 50 people in each class, and we're hoping to grow that, and I think we will. So again, I think for me, it's really about, if you believe love is the greatest healer, if you believe in the power of treating the whole person, if you believe in the global healing traditions, if you want to stay educated and connected to people that have this philosophy, then I'm hoping that the Academy becomes their home, right? Just like it's my home. And, you know, and it's, yeah, the word holistic isn't in it. We got criticized for that, but everything we do is about holism. Everything we teach is about holism. And any of those naysayers, I invite them all to come up with other acronyms and names. to help us.
Well said. Now, with all of this, have you had time for a personal life? We missed out on what.
Yeah. So I was just looking last night. I love to travel. So this little stay at home has put a little travel damper on me. My poodle, who you can't see, just got up from being under the desk. So she's sort of giving me the signal. She went and sat by the door. Okay, you've had enough time for that call. Yeah, it's time for us to go now. And I was just looking last night at some photos. I went with friends on an amazing trip to Jordan and to Egypt and India in the fall, and I'm glad I got to do that trip. We have a foundation called Miraglow, which focuses on providing healthcare for underserved and education in integrative health and medicine and education for underserved. So we've been supporting programs locally. We've been supporting the Academy of Integrative Medicine. We've been supporting nursing school and healthcare in India, fighting human trafficking in Nepal. So a lot of my personal life goes into that and the travels that are involved in that. And if anyone watches this video and has a sweet spot for any of those areas, we welcome a donation. So that's, I enjoy being outside. I'm a Sagittarian, right? So we Sages, I love being on the beach. I love being in the sun. I love to travel. I love to hike. I love to walk. It's really hard for me to be in the house.
Come a long way from your Italian community in Brooklyn.
I would say so.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily a good thing, right? It's just a different thing. It's just a different community. And, and my spiritual life is very, very important. I have a spiritual teacher in India. I believe in, I get a lot of strength from my spiritual life. I believe that there truly is a divine plan. That's not always my plan. I use my meditation. I'm trained in TM on a daily basis. I enjoy chanting, which I find really helps me to ground. So my spiritual life is very, very important.
Interesting. It was Herb Benson's paper on lowering blood pressure with meditation back in 1970 that a patient showed me when I was an intern. That was my crossroads. Went, whoa! What?
What's that? Right. And now we have Schneider's last paper on TM in African Americans with super high blood pressure, showing a 48% reduction in heart attack, stroke, and sudden death. So, to me, when we have that kind of research, right, it just becomes medicine.
Yeah.
Right? We used to call it alternative medicine, right?
Yeah. So any final words to wrap up with, or?
Well, I think that I just want to honor all of those people that taught me. Gladys McGarry, who I love dearly.
How's she doing? I heard she had a
well,
she's recovering.
She's doing very well. I went to her birthday party, and she's just a bright light. So really, to honor those people that, I didn't come to this in a vacuum. I was dragged along, and I was educated. And Lee Lipsenthal and Molly Roberts, who taught me what leadership is really about in her graceful, beautiful way. I just feel that I hope I could be, for the next generation, some of those things.
Now, was it Gladys's 100th birthday party you went to, or
99?
99, because
we celebrate 100 November 30th.
Okay, yeah, because right after I interviewed her, she had a fall or something.
Had the fall. She broke the ribs. She went to the hospital. Got home pretty quickly, and she's been doing okay.
Good.
I'm kind of disappointed because I was going to go with her to Assisi, where she's going to be knighted by the Knights Templar.
Oh, really?
Yes. I mean, imagine that trip. So
Wow.
it was good because she had to cancel it. It was going to be in April, which we would not have been able to go anyway.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll get to do that in the fall.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. It's been a delight to get to know you and
You.
learn all about your incredible contributions. So,
Thank you. Thank you for including me. And please consider talking to Molly.
oh, for sure. And a couple other people you mentioned, I want to get involved too. So,
Yeah, and if you want to send me an email, I can connect you to Molly and
good.
anyone else that you thought, hey, that makes sense.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thanks again.
Thank you. Okay, the poodle will be happy to go out now. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.